Welcome back to Epistemics. Today I am joined by a very special guest. His name is Gerry Cochran.
Yep,
I think I've said that right.
Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Good pronunciation.
Peace be upon you.
Salam.
How are you?
All good, bro. Alhamdulillah.
Okay, so Gerry, we're going to be talking about a very interesting topic today.
We are indeed.
And
inshallah.
that is the topic of, you can say, the history of religion. But
I
in particular,
prefer to use this term, the case for original monotheism.
the case for original
Yeah,
monotheism.
yeah.
So basically the history of monotheism.
As close as we can get it, yeah.
Yeah. So let's take you away, bro. Give us a summary of what we're discussing here today.
Okay, basically, as to the history of religious development of mankind, to make a long story short, there are two opposing camps. The evolutionists are in the camp that man was first as a beast, as they believe, and they developed animistic tendencies and fetishes based around the worship of rocks, rivers, trees, anything they could see around them.
Mm-hmm.
From there, they gradually started to give these things personalities, which gradually morphed into being gods or beings that they worshipped.
Yeah.
Then over time, they stratified these beings into higher level, lower level, gave them each specific jobs, etc., until some were above others. And then eventually this evolved into monotheism. And now mankind has evolved into atheism.
That is the mainstream history that we hear of, pretty much. When
It's
we
what
look
we hear
into-
of.
Yeah.
It's what we hear of.
That's until recently, until you got me looking into this subject a few weeks ago, about less than a few weeks ago. But until then, I believed that to be the sort of standard or the correct view, I guess, from what we understand from, or the way history tells us the way this unfolded, which is, like you said, in human interactions with material things, their surroundings, nature, and then they've eventually give these things personalities. And then over time, there's a tendency to start deifying these things and worshipping these things, and before you know it, you have deities, you have gods.
Exactly.
Right? You're saying there's an alternative view. There is another
there
view
is
as
an
well.
alternative view.
Okay, so what is this view?
This view is exactly in sync with the Islamic view.
Okay, so before you give us this view, tell us the Islamic view, I guess.
Excellent. Okay, the Islamic view is very simple and plain. Allah has told us in various different verses, and the Prophet, may peace be upon him, in various different hadith that have been related, that mankind was originally all upon pure monotheism.
Okay.
They all believed in one single sole supreme deity, and after they differed amongst themselves, which is why Allah continuously sent prophets and messengers to call the people back to the original religion, which is basically Islam, submission to God.
Okay.
Now, all the stuff we use here has been taken mainly by Christian scholars and some who are deists. None of this is from Muslims.
Okay.
Now, they have used this information to support Christianity, but the reality is it doesn't support Christianity. And in one of the articles written by the Christians, he's actually debunked that it supports Christianity himself. It supports Islam. It only supports Islam.
What's this article? Who is this by?
We'll get to that.
Okay.
But first, like I was saying to you before the show, these scholars, they were alive in the 1800s and 1900s when the search for original monotheism was a big thing. Yeah, I'm going to name the more prominent ones now, just so people know that we have references here. And the work of the more prominent scholars has been built on by the ones that came after them. So everything kind of refers back to these few main ones. Yeah, you have a guy called Andrew Lang, who was a Scottish anthropologist, Christian. He lived from 1844 to 1912. A guy called Johannes Ebrard, who lived from 1818 to 1888. He was a German theologian. Another German called Max Müller, who was a German philologist, 1823 to 1900. And the person who has the main body of work in this field is called Wilhelm Schmidt. Now, he has a number of books. Some have been translated in English, some haven't. His main one hasn't. It's in English, it's translated as The Origin of the Idea of God. It's 4,500 pages. 13 volumes long, and it took decades to write. So you can see the depth.
Yeah, so let's get this. Let me just summarize and get this straight for people. What we're saying, we're talking about serious scholarship.
Absolutely.
We're talking and especially I actually read the introduction to this book in the beginning of God by Winfred Corden,
another German theologian.
Winfred Corden, and he, like we said, he respects this guy a lot.
Yes.
And he refers to him as well in his work a lot. Now, what I found interesting was that he mentions in his introduction that in the sort of late 19th, early 20th century, there was quite heated debates going on about, this whole history of monotheism and history of religion and which camp people fell into and what their views were. And what seemed to be the case is that the view that you originally or initially mentioned, which was that religion started off in a very pantheistic, a polytheistic way, and then developed into monotheism over time. This became the dominant view.
Yes.
Now, let me ask you, from your research and your study of this, why do you think that happened? Have you got some thoughts on that? Any reflections?
I do. Okay. Why do I think the evolutionists came up with this idea?
Why do you think the predominant view became that of polytheism to monotheism and not the other way around?
Okay.
Why did that view prosper over the other view?
Because
I'm not saying there's a right or wrong answer.
Those who tried to rebut, those who put forward the idea of original monotheism were secular evolutionists.
Right, okay.
Along the Darwinian style.
Okay.
Yeah. So they could never accept that mankind was originally monotheist and gradually started to worship other than God. And became fetishist, animist, ancestor worshippers, etc. Because if they do, the evolutionary theory goes out the window. And they've even superimposed the idea of man evolving from ape to human on top of religion. They seem to think it had to have evolved.
Wow.
And everything they have is theory and conjecture. The archaeological evidence is against it. The historical evidence is against it. And common sense is against it. Like when I was, before I became Muslim, one of the doubts I had, and that a lot of people have, and atheists still come back with this, is, people used to worship multiple gods.
Yes.
And this has dwindled into monotheism or evolved into monotheism. This is not true. There is some truth in the statement, but there is a lot of truth behind it that they don't know. Yeah, but it's so there if you do the digging. Yeah, if you don't do anything more than scratch the surface, and that's what you want to find, that's it. Yeah.
So good. So let's go. Let's take a journey down the line of thinking that these scholars and historians did, which was that monotheism was the way or the initial belief, which then degraded, or if you like, it developed, whichever way you want to see it, into polytheism and the worship of many gods, which is exactly in line, like you said, with the Islamic tradition, that we believe God sent many messengers, and each messenger came with that fundamental pure message of Tawheed or monotheism. I personally don't like to refer to the word monotheism because it's used quite loosely in the English language, because you would say monotheism includes Christianity and so on.
So is polytheism.
Of course,
all these terms can be used loosely.
So, but when we say monotheism, we're
talking Islamic monotheism.
Yeah, the pure understanding of God's oneness. Which is, exactly. So it began with that monotheism.
Yes.
And God sent messengers with this pure message, and then when they delivered it to the people held on to it for a while, and then they lost it over time, right? Hence God sent more messengers. Now, give me a bit more, bro. So fine, okay, there was this view in history, right? It was as predominant as the other view up until the late 19th, early 20th century. For one reason or the other view became more popular, which is that of polytheism to monotheism and the evolution of monotheism. Give me some more background. Give me something a bit more substantial, bro. So what have they shown? What have these researchers shown as far as the monotheistic belief in societies and civilizations has gone?
My notes are a bit of a mess, so just give
take
me
your time, bro.
To go through.
I like it. I like things to
so do I.
evolve, and I like a bit of a mess. The audience knows this anyway.
Okay, so I'll start here. Now this is part of an article by a Christian called Frank Ellenwood, who has also passed away, as far as I know, who's an American theologian. And the passage I use supports us in Islam, but bizarrely it refutes his own Christian belief.
Okay.
as well as kind of refuting others as well. So he says that God has overruled all things, even the errors and wickedness of men, for some wise object will not be denied. That he has implanted in human understanding many correct conceptions of ethical truth, so that noble principles are found in the teachings of all religious systems, and that God is the author of all truth and all right impulses, even in heathen minds, is readily admitted. Now here's the kicker for Christians. But that he has directly planned and chosen the non-Christian religions on the principle that half-truths and perverted truths and the direct opposites of the truth were best adapted to certain stages of development. In other words, that he has causatively led any nation into error and consequent destruction as a means of preparing for subsequent generations something higher and better, we cannot admit. Everything would depend on the age and the environment in which one's lot was cast. We cannot believe that fetishism and idolatry have been God's kindergarten method of training the human race for the higher and more spiritual service of his kingdom, i.e. Christianity. Now we'd agree with that statement completely. Yeah, because in the history, like when we go back to the original monotheism, we see it plain and simple. We don't see the idea of God sending his son as a sacrifice for all of mankind, etc., etc. So I find it kind of strange that he put that in there, but we can begin with this anyway.
Yeah, so give us, I'm sure the viewers now are quite intrigued and they're probably thinking, you know what, okay, this is interesting, he cited some references, he cited some scholarship, but give us some examples of civilizations that these guys have shared and certain beliefs that these civilizations held which were in line with monotheism. Have you got anything based on specifics that you can share with us?
I will start with, I've done a full video on this on other channels,
talking about this before.
It's worth going there to cover the area of the Americas, North and Central America mainly, and the beliefs of some of the tribes. It's a book by a guy called Ernest Thompson Seton, who was a Christian settler of the Americas, and he encountered many different native tribes.
Show them the cover of the book, just so if anyone that's interested in wanting to, you've heavily referenced
whose beliefs he
that book
documented.
Okay.
Like I say, I've done a full video on this, so I'm just going to touch on the more heavy stuff in regards to the monotheistic belief.
Just summarize it for us. What was the
it will be a summary anyway.
Did they believe in God? What was the
of course. Here, the Indian creed. There is one great oversoul, the Great Spirit, the creator and ruler of all things, who is eternal, invisible, omnipotent, and unportrayable. To him we are responsible. In and through him all beings live and move. To him all worship and allegiance are due. From him all good things come. Him we must approach with reverence. His favour may be won by prayer, sacrifice, and a kindly life. Knowledge of him by discipline, by fasting, and by lonely vigil, and with that knowledge will come his guidance.
Sounds like
it's Islamic tradition.
Yeah, sounds like we're talking about Allah, God.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Just bounce on to what they say about a little bit about the afterlife. Just one paragraph. What the next life contains for him, i.e. man, he does not know and has no means of knowing, and no words to express it, even if he had gleams of light. But of this he is assured, his condition there will be governed by his record and his behaviour here. If he has been a good father, neighbour, a brave defender of his homeland, he need have no concern for his future well-being. Through what profits we do not know, but the evidence is beyond challenge that the red man, i.e. native Indians, before the white man came, had achieved the knowledge of the creator of the universe and worshipped him in spirituality, kindness and truth.
Did they have a prophet that they referred to, or
no
records of that?
No, this was all oral.
Okay, so let's move on, bro. Give us more.
Okay.
That is pure, like that's as monotheistic of a set of teachings as you're gonna find.
Yeah, I'll just give you the touch on the first two commandments as he has listed them. There is but one great spirit. That's the first commandment, simple as that. And second commandment is, this commandment forbids portraiture of the Great Spirit. No Indian ever tried to depict the one Great Spirit. Third commandment, thou shalt not swear falsely in the name of the Great Spirit. This is basic Tawheed, you know.
Amazing.
Actually, there's a ton more in that book, but
Amazing,
for brevity,
amazing.
we're going to touch on each of these areas briefly
Mm-hmm.
because we don't have the time to do
Let
more.
me play the devil's advocate, bro.
Yeah.
That's just
Cool.
a one-off, isolated case. What do you have to say regarding that?
Okay, fair enough. We can jump to my high-tech bookmarking here.
Yeah, I love the bookmark. You need to show them the bookmarking. I mean, I'm not to destroy my books, but this is
The bookmark is a
built
piece
envelope
of a
in
shredded
there,
envelope.
and you've got some interesting X markings. Well,
And I
whatever
use the
works for you,
Twix
bro.
wrapper as well.
Twix wrapper, everything goes in. Brilliant.
Okay, so here, again, this is referring to Andrew Lang in his book, The Making of Religion. We referenced him earlier.
Mm-hmm.
He's talking about the natives of the Andaman Islands, which are just west of Thailand.
Mm-hmm. Any time frame before you start giving us the background? So
Lang was 1800s.
the individuals he's referring to.
No.
Okay.
No, you won't get time
Are they
frames.
ancient, or would you say?
Well, they were basically cut off from the rest of the world.
Right.
So these beliefs had to have stemmed from ancient times.
Fair enough.
So he says the Andaman Islanders, a pygmoid group, were cut off from communication with the rest of the world for a long time, though they were richer in material culture than some of their neighbouring tribes. He has rebutted something that was given to him as a doubt. He said the religion is probably not due to missionaries, as they almost always shot all foreigners. Like some Australian tribes, they drew a web of secrecy around their religion. Thus, among Westerners, they were known as religionless people for a while.
Interesting.
How convenient. So E.H. Mann, who has written a book on the original inhabitants of the Andaman Islands, this guy was British, he spent 11 years with them, learned their language and gained their trust.
Mm-hmm.
So he was rewarded with learning about their beliefs. Their supreme God is an invisible being who is without beginning or end in time, who knows our very thoughts and enforces a strict moral code. Among the sins he may punish are falsehood, theft, grave assault, murder, adultery, bad carving of meat, and burning wax for the purpose of witchcraft.
Mm-hmm.
However, he also has pity on those who are hurting and may possibly provide relief.
Interesting.
So these are people from the middle of nowhere in
Right.
the south of Asia.
Cut off from the rest of the world, so they can't
Cut
be
off from the
influenced in
rest
any way,
of the
shape, or
world.
form. Okay.
Not far from these people, we have a tribe or a people, I think it's pronounced Orayons. They were another people who were cut off in around India, Bangladesh area. And this is very interesting here because the scholar referenced, Mircea Eliade, he says, everywhere in these primitive religions, the celestial supreme being appears to have lost religious currency. Not that he's gone.
Mm-hmm.
Not that he's gone. He has no place in their cults, and in the midst he draws farther and farther away until he becomes a remote god. Yet he is always remembered and entreated as the last resort, when all ways of appealing to other gods and goddesses, the ancestors and the demons, have failed. They say, now we have tried everything, but we still have you to help us. God, thou art our creator, have mercy on us. The Quran says the exact same thing about the polytheists of Arabia. They all believed in Allah, and they believed in certain attributes of His, as we know, but they associated partners with Him. But they never considered any of them on the same level.
Yeah.
But speaking about the polytheists, Allah says in Surah Rum, verse 33, when adversity touches the people, their Lord, turning in repentance to Him, then when He lets them taste mercy of Him, at once a party of them associate others with their Lord. And there are other similar verses as well that show when the mushriks, the polytheists, are in real trouble, and they think they're on the brink of death, they pray to Allah alone.
Yeah, it's interesting that even he mentions that they turned away, but they never forgot God.
Yes.
Now, what's interesting, I recently was reading one of the tafsir, the exegesis of the Quran, by a scholar named Amin Hassan Islahi, and he made a very interesting point. He said one of the reasons people moved away from the understanding of the worship of the one true God was because they started to think and feel over time that they could not connect with such a high being, such a perfect being. And he said this is one of the reasons why Allah, whenever He, in the Quran, when He mentions one of His names and attributes, He pairs them, right? So for example, when He says in the 112th chapter, say He is God who's uniquely one, right? and we get this notion that he is so high and pure and far
beyond
beyond that we can never reach him.
Yeah.
But don't feel like, oh, it's going to escape you. No, because then in the very next verse God says that he is as-samad, which means that he's the one that's completely independent and everything is dependent upon him at every single moment of his existence, meaning he is the one we should turn to and ask from.
It can also be translated as the eternal refuge.
Yes,
the one who was always
absolutely
sought.
Yes, exactly.
So
the pairing of names shows us the greatness of God, but also reminds us that yes, God is the greatest and the most high,
Absolutely.
but that doesn't mean it gives you an excuse to now feel like you can never communicate with him or ask him directly.
And this problem still exists, unfortunately.
Yeah. And obviously evil forces play on these things and people and
do.
move people away from the truth. Anyway, continue, bro. I don't want to disrupt you too much.
The tricks are the same. Like, none of the doubts that the atheists and agnostics come with today are new.
Yeah.
People have always been coming with these doubts. The Quran actually answers them all directly. Just the language used is a little bit different. So we went to the Americas and we went to Southeast Asia. Yes. So we'll stay in Southeast Asia, more or less, but we go to Burma, another Christian guy called Don Richardson, who has wrote a book, Eternity in Their Hearts. He speaks about a Burmese tribe called the Karen people. Here they talking about one supreme being who they worship. They call him, I'm going to guess this is Iwa. Iwa is eternal, his life is long. 1 eon, he dies not. 2 eons, he dies not. He is perfect in meritorious attributes. Eon follows eon, he dies not. Another hymn extols him as the creator. Who created the world in the beginning? Iwa created the world in the beginning. He appointed everything. He is unsearchable. The omnipotent is Iwa. Him have we not believed. Iwa created men anciently. He has perfect knowledge of all things. He created men at the beginning. He knows all things to the present time. O my children and grandchildren, heaven is the place where he sits. He sees all things. We are manifest to him. He formed the world originally. He appointed food and drink. He appointed the fruit of trial. He gave detailed order. Mukauli deceived 2 persons. He caused them to eat the fruit of the tree of trial. They obeyed not, they believed not Iwa. When they ate the fruit of trial, they became subject to sickness, aging, and death. Now there's the hymns, and a quote from Don Richardson in his book says, these Karen people had obstinately adhered to their own folk religion despite high-pressure attempts by the Burmese to convert them to Buddhism.
Interesting, very interesting. You almost get the sense of the story of Adam in that passage right there.
Yeah. Also, the various different stories in Quran are reflected in some way throughout these cultures as well.
And sometimes the Orientalists and others would jump and say, "Hold on a second, look, the Quran has copied previous scriptures, copied previous traditions." Well, not so fast. That's one potential conclusion you can draw, but as equally you can draw the other conclusion. Well, it's the same author.
Yeah,
it's the same creator, the cause that's been sending revelation messages throughout history. Hence, you see the similarities, right? So
common sense, a little bit of common sense tells you, look, every single culture across the world, in every part of the world, has always held some sort of religious belief, and there are a great many similarities. Yeah. How could they possibly have copied each other when there were thousands of miles between them and they had no means of contacting each other whatsoever? It is nothing less than ludicrous to think that they all came up with the same ideas.
You sure they didn't have mobile phones or internet around at the time?
Well, I don't know. We can make an educated guess,
So you got anything from Africa, Asia?
I'm going to Africa. I'm going to China, I'm going to India.
Okay. So we've still got quite a bit of the journey ahead of us.
Yeah, they're short references,
But I'm sure people are finding it interesting. While Gerry's looking for this, if you guys haven't subscribed to the channel already,
cool.
We're back on. Yep, we're back on already. If you guys haven't subscribed already, make sure to subscribe because we'll have many more interesting videos like this being uploaded regularly. So make sure to subscribe, make sure to share. Let me know your thoughts below regarding what you think of this content, any research you've done on this particular topic. It'll be really good to get your insights too, and I'll make sure that Gerry checks out the comments too so he can respond to some of your questions that you guys may have post show. I'm sure there's going to be many questions, Gerry, bro, for this particular topic.
Let the questions come.
Yeah.
Let the questions come. Okay, regarding the creator of the universe, the Kapauku believe the universe and all existence was Ebijata, which is what they call the designed by Ugutame, the creator. To my inquiry whether... this is quotes from a missionary, a Christian missionary called Leopold Pospisil. To my inquiry whether Ugitame was the sun and the moon, I received the answer, a firm denial. Sun and moon are only manifestations of Ugitame, who thus makes his presence known to the people and are definitely not the creator himself. He is omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, credited with the creation of all things and having determined all events. His existence is not considered the same as our existence. He is beyond this phenomenal dimension because of the simple reason that he created it. They believe and reason that evil as well as good have been equally created and determined by the Creator, which we also believe. Wrong page. And an argument between a Kapaku, hope I'm pronouncing it right, and a Christian missionary. A Kapaku is basically logical. He refuses to accept dogmas that either oppose clear empirical evidence or that contradict his common sense or logic. Okay, so a very old man from the Mapia region, supported by his two sons, managed to come to see me, i.e. the missionary, in the Kamu Valley. As he explained to me, his main purpose in coming was a problem he wanted clarified before he died. He could not understand how it is possible the white man could be so clever and ingenious in designing things such as aeroplanes, guns, medicines, clothes, steel tools, etc., and still be so primitive and illogical in his religion. Why, if the Creator is omnipotent, did the Creator have to change himself into a man to allow himself to be killed, when it would have been enough for him just to order men to behave? The notion that anything can be absolutely bad or good was quite incomprehensible to him. Further, the Christian notion of man resembling God in appearance to him was called tabe, meaning ridiculous. Now, where is their supreme God residing? So they have some strange beliefs, but basically above.
Right.
Above the sky.
It's very interesting. The missionaries went quite far. The missionaries went quite deep.
No, they went very far, to be fair to them.
So Gerry, look, let's give me one more. I know there's so many more you want to cover, and I'm sure what we're going to do is we'll do a more, if people really prefer this content, we're going to do a detailed breakdown and maybe do a whole series of episodes on this particular topic, addressing specific civilizations. But give me one more which has really sort of baffled you, right? You can either go to Asia, India, or Asia, or that side of Asia, or China.
One which is even more well documented is ancient China.
Okay.
They are assumed to have been, I suppose they still kind of are in a way, ancestor worshippers. And the evolutionists, who have kind of rebutted or tried to rebut the original monotheism idea, have pegged them as ancestor worshippers from way back. Again, that's only partially true.
Okay.
Yeah, they did venerate spirits and they did venerate ancestor worship, but they also believed in one supreme being who created all of these other beings that they gave worship to and ruled over them. This being is known as Shang-Ti or Shang-Te. Depending on who translates that word, it either means God Most High or the Emperor of Heaven. So here we have Professor Legge of Oxford, who has claimed from what he regards as valid linguistic proofs. He says 5,000 years ago, the Chinese were monotheist. Not even henotheist, but monotheist. Though he does add that even then there was a constant struggle with nature worship and divination. There is a prayer by the emperor of the Ming dynasty, which is quite recent in terms of this subject, from 1538 AD, who first addressed the spirits of the hills, the rivers, and the seas, asking them to intercede for him with Shangte, which is exactly like Allah describes the practice of the mushriks. They have taken intercessors in between them and God, for whom no authority was ever sent.
Yes.
So he says to his so-called intercessors, "We will trouble you on our behalf to exert your spiritual power and to display your vigorous efficacy, communicating our poor desires to Shangte and praying him graciously to grant us his acceptance and regard and to be pleased with that which we shall reverently present." But, back to the scholar, very different was the language used when he came to address Shangte himself. "Of old, in the beginning, there was great chaos without form and dark. The elements had not begun to revolve, nor the sun and moon to shine. Thou, O spiritual sovereign, most forth in thy presidency, first did divide the grosser parts from the purer. Thou made heaven, thou made earth, thou made man. All things got their being with your producing power. Thou hast opened the course for the inactive and active forces of matter to operate. Thou did produce, O Spirit, the sun and the moon and the planets, and pure and beautiful was their light. The vault of heaven was spread like a curtain, and all creatures were happy. I, thy servant, presume reverently to thank thee. All the tribes of animated beings are indebted to thy favour for their being. Men and creatures are in paradise in thy love. All living things are indebted to thy goodness. But who knows whence his blessings come to him? It is thou, O Lord, who art the parent of all things." Now the scholar says, surely this prayer, humbly offered by a monarch, would not be greatly out of place among the Psalms of David.
Wow, very, very interesting, man.
And there's, I just
go
touch on a bit more in China. Yeah, Dr. Legg asserts that both in the Shu King and the Shi King, which are old texts, cultural texts from China, that Shangte appears as a personal being ruling in heaven and earth, the author of man's moral nature, the governor among the nations, the rewarder of good and the punisher of evil. But there remains to this day remarkable evidence of the worship of the supreme God, as he was worshipped in the days of the Emperor Shun. Now look, this is 2356 BC.
That's going way.
So we're going 4,500 years back.
That's almost going to the beginning of civilizations, historically speaking.
It's found in the great Temple of Heaven at Peking, where Dr. Martin, Professor Legg, and Dr. Douglas all insist the sacrifices there celebrated are relics of the ancient worship of the Supreme God. This is the highest place of Chinese devotion, and the thoughtful visitor feels he ought to tread its courts with unsandaled feet, for no vulgar idolatry has entered here.
Wow.
There is no idols or inscriptions to anything other than one God. Yeah, and Dr. Legg adds, there is no need of extended argument to establish the fact that the early Chinese were by no means destitute of the knowledge of the true God. Dr. Legg, the learned translator of the Chinese classics, expressed the views so fully here that he actually put his shoes off from his feet before ascending the great altar.
Very interesting. So Gerry, what we're getting here, bro, from obviously, this is not all of your research. You just shared the sort of just some bits and pieces from what you've looked into, and what we're getting here is quite clearly that number one, at least some things we can conclude. Number one, that you can argue every single civilization believed in the divine, in the supreme being, had a religion, followed a way of life.
That's what the evidence shows us.
Absolutely. And secondly, what we're also learning is that there seems to be, a trend, which is that monotheism has been present across all continents from very early on. We're talking like 2,000-3,000 BC.
Yeah.
maybe further back, right?
You can't go further back.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's just a speculation, I guess, at that point. But 2,000-3,000. So, where from the very beginning of known civilizations, there has been monotheism that's been practiced. What you've shared and some of the views regarding this creator, this supreme being, are very similar, if not identical in some cases, to what we learn about Allah from the Islamic tradition. Now, this begs the question: where did the Prophet, peace be upon him, get the Sallallahu peace be upon him? Where did he get the information, or that that God has sent messengers throughout history, revealing the same fundamental message, which is that the call to the one supreme creator who's uniquely one? That's another question in and of itself, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
For me, I guess it's a clear sign, and I'm sure for anyone that's watching too. So from this, Gerry, I want you to conclude on this. Just share your thoughts regarding all of this research and everything you've looked into. From this, what would you say to someone that's watching this and maybe has come across this for the first time, right? How should this impact their view, if you like, number one, of who the creator is, and number two, of Islam itself? I know it's a bit of a tricky, vague type of question.
Not really.
But I guess what I'm trying to get is that how could all of this information help someone with them making the decision to really take and consider Islam seriously? I guess that's what I'm really getting at.
Well, basically it's like this. If Allah, the one God, is going to send revelation down, and that revelation speaks about such and such a field or such and such an area, then what is spoken has to be completely true. So it has to sync with what's going on around us, or what went on around us. Now, if the mainstream narrative being pushed is, which it is, that man evolved from a lower animalistic life form up to humans today, and his religious belief evolved with him from fetishism all the way to atheism, and will continue to evolve, you have a stark opposition to this in the Quranic narrative. Quran says clearly that this, the opposite is true. Now, the evidence is there for all of you to go and do the digging yourself. Like I said, all of this is put together by Christian scholars who have worked literally to the point where they dropped from exhaustion numerous times. One of them has wrote a 4,500 page book on the case for original monotheism. So what Allah tells us synchronizes with the history of the world. Now you have to ask yourself, how can that be? If the Quran is not what it claims to be, how can that be? And the passages in the Quran, of which I'll read the translation of here, are quite simple. Very simple. In Surah Yunus, verse 19, it says, mankind was not but one community, but then they differed. And if not for a word that proceeded from your Lord, it would have been judged between them concerning that over which they differ. The differing here is coming away from the pure Islamic monotheism into all types of false worship. In Surah Nahl, Surah 16, verse 36, Allah says, translated, we certainly sent into every nation a messenger saying, worship Allah and avoid Taghut. Taghut is anything which claims an attribute of Allah that it has no right to claim. And among them were those whom Allah guided, and among them were those upon whom error was deservedly decreed. So proceed through the earth and observe how was the end of the deniers. The Quran is telling you clearly the evidence is there for you. Also Allah says in Surah Fatir 35:24, indeed we have sent you with the truth as a bearer of good tidings and a warner. There was no nation but that there had passed within it a warner. And in Surah 13 number 7, those who disbelieve say, speaking about the Prophet, why has a sign not been sent down to him from his Lord? You are only a warner, and for every people is a guide. Now the scholars have said the verse that says to every ummah, a rasul, meaning a messenger, specifically refers to actual messengers. But the warners and the guides can be prophets, they can be messengers, or they can be people carrying the message of the messengers. And that's what seems to sync with history. That warners and guides have sprung up everywhere, even in remote islands in the middle of the sea, as we've seen. And like Brother Imran said, this was only scratching the surface. there's evidence of original monotheism also in Persia, in India, getting there in Europe and the old Caucasian Indo-European cultures. It's not so clear, but you can get to henotheism, which means acknowledgement of one supreme being, but worship of others who are under that supreme being. So look, basically any culture which is officially or mainstream classed as polytheist, if you do a little bit of digging, not that much, you either find less polytheism, henotheism, or clear monotheism.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
And these Christian scholars, they've rebutted all the rebuttals, and they've even rebutted the rebuttals to the rebuttals, and on and on and on, and they've done so with the evidence. They have shown, this would take videos, they have shown clearly that the idea that religion evolved is based on nothing but theory and conjecture. The historical evidence, the archaeological evidence, and the common sense as well, it shows that monotheism was the original state of mankind.
This is brilliant. I think we've given a lot of food for thought for people that are watching this. Like I said, thank you for coming on, Gerry. Like I've said, guys, if you found this interesting, let me know your thoughts below. If you have questions for Gerry, leave them below. I'm sure Gerry will check the questions and respond to you. Make sure to subscribe. Let me know if you want to see more videos on this topic. And until next time, take care.